Welcome to All About Campion, an introduction to loving the films and sometimes the TV shows of Jane Campion. I'm Inkoo Kang, a critic at the Washington Post, and my co-host is Daniel Schroeder, a podcast producer at Slate.
Hey Inkoo, are any of these actually TV shows though?
Let's talk about it in just a little bit. Daniel, we're gonna go off book a little bit today. I'm gonna start us with a quote
From Quentin Tarantino?
And I just want you to bask in this quote because I think that is actually all you can really do with it. So,
Hit me.
before I even made Bright Star, I had the idea I'd like to do a crime mystery story set in that part of the world with the themes of paradise. I think the dreams we have in our life are probably more substantial than reality, like the hope for love or a soulmate. I would say the dream of paradise, a place on earth where things are simpler and somehow you're away from all the complications of life, is also a very enduring dream that is so powerful for the whole world. To me, our story really looks at the power of these dreams and for the people who are the casualties of the dreams.
That's some Jane Campion ass shit right there. Like, what a string of hilarious nonsense.
Bless her. Last time, we got in deep with In the Cut. On this episode, we are going to talk about the first season of Campion's thus far only TV series, Top of the Lake.
Whoa. It's her second TV series.
That's a mini-series, so it doesn't count.
Okay, sorry, keep going.
What we were referring to, obviously, was An Angel at My Table. In Top of the Lake, Elizabeth Moss stars in the 2013 season as Robin, a detective returning to her rural hometown in New Zealand after spending the last decade or so in Sydney, Australia. I think it's fair to say the show's most memorable character, however, is Holly Hunter's GJ, a mysterious guru to a group of broken middle-aged women who have decided to create a new home for themselves in an area called Paradise. As GJ, Hunter wears a long gray wig that many people have noted looks quite a bit like Campion's own hair, although Hunter and Campion have stated that she is not the model for GJ, but rather that the character is an homage to an Indian guru named U.G. Krishnamurti, who made a big impact on the director. And by the way, if you have not yet seen Holy Smoke, please watch it immediately, and if you don't know why I'm mentioning it, again, please go watch it immediately. Directed by Jane Campion and Garth Davis, the 7-part police procedural is striking for how much it doesn't quite feel like the usual police procedural. Although it's a lot more efficient looking than Campion's films, the series does have her fingerprints all over it. Top of the Lake takes place against dramatic New Zealand landscapes. Although, for perhaps the first time since The Piano, we get a sense of how arduous it must be to actually live amid such beautiful but isolated nature. The series is also largely about male violence against women, and female survival and resilience in spite of it. In the US, Top of the Lake aired on the Sundance Channel and was nominated for a handful of Emmys, including Best Miniseries or Movie, writing in that genre for Campion and Sweetie co-writer Gerard Lee, directing by Campion and Davis, Best Lead Actress for Elizabeth Moss, and Best Supporting Actor for Peter Mullen, who plays a local gangster eventually revealed to have a finger in every pie in Robin's hometown. Hunter, who I think it should be noted actually only appears in like 10 minutes total, was also nominated for a SAG Award. Unlike in previous episodes, I think that we should talk mostly in a spoiler-free context, and then toward the end we'll have a spoilery section. So, Daniel, you ready?
I'm ready. In broad strokes, the story is about Sydney detective Robin Griffin, played by Elizabeth Moss, who returns to her hometown in New Zealand to care for her dying mother and ends up entangled in a sexual assault investigation because a 12-year-old girl, Tui, played by Jacqueline Joe, is pregnant. While Robin is starting her investigation, we also meet the women at Paradise and their cult-like leader GJ, played by Holly Hunter. The women are in a dispute with Matt Mitchum, played by Peter Mullen, a local drug kingpin who claims the land they're on was owed to him. We learn that Matt is the father of Tui and seems to be the father of a lot of other children and adults in the town. As Robin digs deeper, we find out the reason she's so passionate about this case is because how similarly it mirrors her own experience when she was raped as a teenager and became pregnant, eventually carrying the child to term and giving it up for adoption. She reconnects with her high school sweetheart, Jono, played by Tom Wright, a son of Matt Mitchum's, but her mother is really against them being together for reasons that we will find out. Tui runs away from home with a gun and hides in the forest, and her friend Jamie, played by Luke Buchanan, brings her food and necessities, but eventually falls to his death after Matt's men chased him and Tui through the woods. Anything else I feel like would be an actual spoiler, so I think that's where we should leave it until we get to the spoiler chunk.
So I think that we watched most of this together, and at some point you said, oh, this is just like Mayor of Easttown or Mayor of Queenstown. Like, what brought you to say that?
Well, I mean, it's very similar in that it's a story of a female detective who seems driven by something more than just professional interest or curiosity to get justice for someone, even when it seems everybody else is disinterested in helping solve the actual case. And I don't know, it also felt kind of like the local griminess of it, I would say. The like small town feel of both of them, and yeah, it just kind of moody in the same way.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I want to get this off the bat. Like, I think this is a very good show.
I agree.
It is also like an incredibly messy show. I honestly, like, I think if you took out like GJ and like that women's camp, which is like absolutely the most interesting thing about Top of the Lake, if you just like lifted that from the plot, I don't think the plot would actually change very much. I feel like with a lot of like the women's camp stuff, it felt like they were there sort of like for atmospherics more than like actual importance, and I think that there's like a lot of like thematic meatiness to the women's camp, but ultimately I don't think that they were like super crucial to sort of like the structure of Top of the Lake. And so yeah, I think there's like there's a messiness here, but also I love this.
Yeah. Oh, I loved it too. I think that it is kind of a jumbled mess at times. I think that like I really enjoy the women's camp, but like it feels so like when I think of those scenes and then I think of like the series, I literally can't tell you where any of them happened in the story. Like the scene where Genevieve Lemon, so happy to see her. When Genevieve Lemon goes and has sex with like whomever in the like local bar establishment wants to fuck her, I can't tell you when that happens in this show because like it is so out of the realm of the rest of the story. And so much of that feels like their atmosphere, they're not substance.
Yeah. And I do think it's interesting that GJ, and I almost feel like that name is like hard to say like on
it's
purpose,
terrible.
almost.
It's a terrible name.
Yeah, I feel like GJ, there's like nothing about her really that like leads the protagonist anywhere. There's nothing about her that leads Tui anywhere. She speaks in these like really vague, like almost fortune cookie like aphorisms, and you're constantly like, what the fuck is she saying?
Also, she's such a bully.
Yes, I have no idea like what these women are getting out of her, even though
they're getting what they got from their husbands.
Oh my god, that's like the most depressing thing. Apparently
Sorry.
Jane Campion herself called these women, like in her head, the unfuckables.
That's a harsh.
No, but I think that's sort of like the like mode of womanhood that she was like really interested in as a gray-haired middle-aged woman herself. I think like that's sort of like the period of life she was interested in exploring. And I think like the one thing I found super compelling thematically about these like severely broken women, a bunch of whom are actually American and I think are supposed to be like much wealthier than the people in the town. And that's why they're not sort of like beholden to Matt Mitchum. Is that you can sort of see that they are like the future selves of the slightly younger women who work for Matt Mitchum because they feel like they have no other way of making a living in this like extremely isolated small town. And when they finally decide that they're going to go against him and like testify against his
Drug ring, yeah.
yeah, his drug ring, that's sort of like the point at which there is a form of resistance, and then as we see like that whole attempt at resistance is ultimately also really compromised by the police captain. But ultimately, yeah, like you can sort of see like these slightly younger women like being on like the precipice of being broken, and then sort of like the actual women who are broken. It's almost like a before after.
Mm-hmm.
I also just found super striking that whole image of all of these women living in shipping containers.
Mm-hmm.
And
For $50 a week.
and I totally, on the one hand, like understood where Matt Mitchum was coming from because he wants this land, which is by this like gorgeous lake where the town is.
And his mother was buried on it.
Yes, to be as like clean as possible. And he's basically like, you guys are foreigners who have no idea how to live on this land, and you're going to like pollute it with like your shit and like your piss basically, right? And so I like that that was sort of like a point at which you could sympathize with this like highly unsympathetic character. Although Peter Mullen like also acts the shit out of like Matt Mitchum, and he is like, and has made him like deeply compelling, and is like absolutely a sort of like Harvey Keitel stand-in in this show.
Yeah, when you said that while we were watching it, this is Harvey Keitel's role. I totally agree with you. I think that Mullen does a great job, and he's terrifying. Like,
yes,
even from the like first moments that we really meet him, where he basically murders the guy who gave the land to the ladies that were supposed to be given to him. Like, we from the jump, the first episode, know like this is not a guy to fuck with. But also like kind of exciting because we know that like that means that like Elizabeth Moss is gonna fuck with him.
I will say this. I think that I have unfortunately seen my share of mystery shows about rape, and a lot of those shows have really revolved around like, oh, is like the woman telling the truth or is the man telling the truth? And it just like feels really gross. And one thing I really appreciated about like this particular version of a police procedural is that it just like feels really unique. I think like the stakes are different. Also the fact that like even the girl who is pregnant doesn't know like why she's pregnant or how this happened. I think that's just like a really, really compelling storyline. And I think for most of the show, like you can't really tell like what she knows. But yeah, I found that particular like reconfiguring of the rape mystery to be really fascinating, and also like a really neat parallel with what Campion was trying to subvert with the erotic thriller in The Cut.
Yeah, I mean, wow, we love to do a podcast about rape, I guess. That's our brand.
Thank you.
But speaking of the genre of erotic thriller, like having watched this and having watched now most all of Campion's work, it's so interesting how, like, besides Sweetie and Holy Smoke, all of her work is genre work in a way. And, like, but at the same time, it's so much more than that. Like, we have In the Cut, which is the erotic thriller. We have this, which is the like crime procedural. We have The Piano, which is just a straightforward drama. And yet, like, because she's Campion, she can make so much more of that. So, like, even if this rape crime procedural is like, oh, we've seen this, we know this, this is like old hat by this point, she makes it fresh because of her own perspective and her own, I guess, campionness that, like, I found myself just wanting to watch all of this in one stream. It was very engaging.
This was like a rare show for me where I found it like actually really hard to binge.
Well, then, good thing you weren't at Sundance the year it premiered, because they watched it all in 7 hours with one break for lunch and an intermission.
That sounds like an endurance test.
Yes.
Congrats to those people. I think that there are some things where, so like in the press tour leading up to this TV show, which I don't think did like a ton of interviews for, she did sort of do like the obligatory thing of like, a lot of people were like, oh my god, this film director is making television. And then she had to sort of like go around being like, actually, like TV is like where it's at now.
TV is the new film.
I mean, that's like the gist of like what she said. I think one thing that like we really were almost like forced to grapple with while watching this is that it is absolutely not structured like a television show. Like, it's just like a very like hinky experience watching it as television. And I truly, truly, truly hate it when someone like, you know, like the guys behind Game of Thrones say, oh, we actually made like 100-hour movie. Like, fuck off. Like, that's
gross.
Dumb.
Well, it's a bad movie.
But in this case, I actually feel like if someone told me this was a 6-hour movie, I would be like, that actually makes so much more sense than this being a 7-part miniseries.
Oh, I agree. I think that, like, yeah, I would sit down and watch this as a 6-hour movie.
Did you love GJ's look? The like big long wig and sort of like the earth tones. I think like they said part of the look was to sort of just like try to get GJ to blend into the background.
That's interesting. I liked her because I like Holly Hunter in basically anything. I think she's great, and so like I was excited to see her, but the role is just weird because it doesn't seem to actually do much in terms of like plot or even really in some ways like thematic developments. I don't know, we don't get enough from her ever to ever feel like I have an understanding of who she is or how she fits into the landscape of this show. And so like I was kind of left wanting more the whole time, and not in like a satisfactory way, but in like a there's something missing here kind of way.
Yeah. You get, I think like she speaks like Holly Hunter, so she has like an American accent. We learned that she is actually a Swiss national. Have no idea how that happened. And then I think that because it's a women's camp and all of these women are broken and she has taken it upon herself to be their leader, you assume that she sort of comes with this like feminist ideology or like basically any kind of ideology.
Kind of like some like Earth Mother energy.
Or even like a specific worldview. And you really get nothing. You get cones where you're supposed to be like meditate on like what this is supposed to actually mean.
Yes, but then she also yells at the girls who are meditating. And she also just like is mean to them. She's yells at like
really mean to them.
Like, grow up, stop acting like how you're acting. Like, she's just shitty to them. But yes, they kind of seem to want that.
Yeah. I was sort of like, you should have saved that money for therapy. I think I got the sense that like when Tui would come, or Tui and her friend Jamie would come to the camp and they would want food while Tui was hiding from her dad and like sort of hiding out in the woods, I got the sense that they were able to find that they were useful again in these like maternal roles, and they were able to kind of use their life experience to help this little girl who was in need. And I think that they got something out of that, but I was never convinced that like by the end of the series they were actually helped by anything. I do have a really nice image that I got from a Holly Hunter interview about Top of the Lake, where she said that like after they would film particular scenes, they would all go jump in the lake right behind them. And Jane was also there leading the charge. So,
Of course.
I think one of the really great things about these scenes in the camp is just these like women like wandering around like in nature completely naked. It's sort of just like a group of like post-menopausal Eves who decided like they don't actually need Adam anymore. It's just like a really beautiful, like really, sorry, paradisiacal image.
Oh, I agree. I think that like this show wouldn't be half as good without that existing in it, even if it is such a small part of the like story as a whole. Like we've spent so much time talking about it already.
Yeah. Should we talk about like the parts of the show that are actually the show?
Yes, except that I do think that we need to note the joke that we both made while watching it, which is that Holly Hunter's character is really just also her character from Mr. Mayor.
Yes, RP.
Yes. RP. GJ.
I hate you. So we have a little bit of a almost the piano reunion, because we've got Holly Hunter, we've got Genevieve Lemon, who played the Nellie in the piano, and Jane Campion actually initially offered the role of Robin to Anna Paquin.
Oh.
Which I think she would have been really, really good at.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Anna Paquin had to say no because she was pregnant with twins. So we're here with Elizabeth Moss, who is also very, very good.
Okay, so thrown for a loop right now, but do you remember how you said while we were watching it, that woman looks like Lucy Lawless's sister?
Yes.
That woman was Lucy Lawless.
No.
Lucy Lawless is in this show.
No. What the fuck?
I know, right?
How did we miss this? We're so dumb.
Anyway.
Yeah, let's get to the stuff that actually matters.
Yeah, literally everything else that happens in the show.
So one thing that was very interesting to me while watching this again, and also watching it with you when you were watching it again, is that you apparently had like zero recollection who the father of Tui's baby was. And I definitely remembered, but I'd basically forgotten everything else about the show, like other than like the whole thing that happens at the very end, and also GJ's whole thing. I don't know. Did you like it as a mystery? I think I like the fact that like, I don't know. It seemed like Campion was like much more interested in sort of doing like an indictment of like how dysfunctional the police was. Compared to like actually pursuing the mystery.
Well, yeah, and also just like how corrupt the entire town is, and
Yeah.
is like controlled solely by Matt Mitchum, it seems. So much so that like he has basically sowed his seed across the entire town. And I think that like the mystery, yeah, I was engaged by it, but it definitely wasn't the thing that I thought of most first ever. Like I wasn't ever like, ooh, what? Who impregnated Tui? What happened? Like it didn't feel. I wasn't excited by that mystery, but not in like a bad way. It's just like that wasn't what I was here for, and that wasn't what we were here for in the show. Like,
I think so much more than the mystery behind Tui's pregnancy is the mystery behind why nobody in this town seems to fucking give a fuck, including her family. And Matt cares and like loves his daughter, but then we also get this lingering possibility that he is the father, because he again has fucked everybody apparently in this town. And then I think that the other thing is you get a sense very early on that the Mitchum family tree is like quite twisted. And so you're kind of like, what is happening over here? And also you get the whole larger question of like, why don't the police care and why are they so eager to brush off this mystery? I think that one thing that we should note is that a sort of anti-police thing is like has been like a definite through line in Jane Campion's work, and I think probably is like the strongest here, honestly. I think if we're looking at something like In the Cut and the way that like basically all of the gross people in the cut are cops, I think with this one it just like feels seamier because it's not about like one like individual like rotten egg. It is basically a, I mean it's like a fucking like Jeffrey Epstein-esque conspiracy.
Spoilers.
Yeah, let's just get into spoilers now.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's your spoiler warning. I the thing that like I definitely remembered is sort of like this like house of horrors that Robin enters into at the very end when you think that the mystery has been solved and when you think that like everything has been tied up into a neat bow and she's sort of like, wait, this doesn't quite feel right. Like this all feels like a little bit too neat. And then she goes to the police captain's house and she discovers that he is actually the guy who has been running a pedophile ring in his like seaside mansion. And there's a certain point at which Robin is like, hey, like, how are you affording this on like a police captain's salary? And he's just like, I don't know.
I don't
like,
know how much it costs.
Yeah, he literally says, I don't know how much it costs about his own house. First of all, it's on Zillow. Everyone knows.
She Zillowed it.
Yeah, and I think that and you definitely get these like little hints here and there about sort of like the inefficiency of the cops, but then you sort of get like the shock of that like really brutal reveal of like all these like unconscious girls who have been roofied basically by the police captain and then basically used by like the pedophiles in town and then
by most of the men, it seemed like.
Yes, like the businessmen in the town. And then you also find out that like this was like something that I only caught for the second time. You find out that like a lot of these kids who are being used by Matt came through a barista like training service for like basically
for like troubled kids.
youth.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you find out that like not only is like the police captain using them in this like really gross sex trafficking ring, but he is like just like training them to be in service work, which like added to me just like this like extra layer of like arrogance to that character and his like venality. I don't know. It was just like it was like very gothic, and yet like there was this like weird ring of truth to it.
Well, I have two things. One is that definitely not the time or place, but it was very funny how he had a bottle on his counter that literally said the word roofies.
Yes.
Which is just like, okay, we get it. But what I found interesting about that whole storyline that we find out about basically right at the end is that like none of these girls seem to remember any of their trauma. Like, I don't know, Tui seems happy to go with these girls and the police captain, like, just because they're, like, gonna go hang out, go to the movies or something. And, like, it almost seems like none of the girls that are being abused even are aware of what has been done to them. Like, Tui doesn't even understand how she got pregnant, so, like,
I think that makes sense, especially when you have like someone like GJ who is constantly being like, the body knows, the body will tell you.
That was some nonsense.
But
That
like,
was some.
it also contradicts, like, I mean, or it's sort of like there's a contradiction there, and sort of like this idea that, like, yeah, I think that you're right. Like, Tui's body is evidence, but there would be a lot more like signs of trauma everywhere. I think like the like larger allegory of it really worked for me in that this is like a town that's been so isolated and is so, I don't know, there's almost this like Donner Party-esque thing to it where because these people have decided that they are unreachable by the outside world, they have begun like feeding on their own children. And I think like that really worked for me. I don't, but like again, I think that's maybe a little bit of like a dream logic as opposed to like a logistical reality.
Right. And I think that is a great point. Makes total sense. And also, like, it speaks to the literal and figurative incestuousness of this town.
Yeah.
And how, like, Matt Mitchum seems to be the dad of, like, every single child. And yet he is also now impregnating his own children. Because it turns out that he is the father of Tui's child. And, like, he actually is also the father of Robin, Elizabeth Moss's character. And
I thought that was like the police captain lying. And because Matt Mitchum was dead by the time the DNA test took place, the police captain could say whatever he wanted. Like,
I definitely had that feeling too, but I was just going to take it at its word because also in those results, it was determined that Jono, who is Robin's love interest and also Matt Mitchum's son, thus making Robin and Jono's relationship incest, he like showed up with results saying like, oh, by the way, you're not his kid.
okay.
To Jono. So like they were doing like Matt Mitchum specific DNA testing, it seemed.
Okay. I mean,
but regardless, like either way, it doesn't like really matter because even if he didn't actually, it still speaks to what we're saying about like the feeding on your own children, literally to the extent that you were feeding on your own daughter.
Yeah.
Possibly. Because like he even says like so often how much he loves her and how like strong he feels about her. So even if like
he admires her.
Right. In a way that makes you think maybe he admires her enough to like have sex with her. Sorry. I'm just...
No, I know what you're saying.
Also, what's so, like, now that we've watched it all, I hate to say this, but I feel bad for the pedophile.
The Austrian pedophile? Who is like a red herring.
Right. There's this whole subplot at the beginning of the series where, like, there's this one guy who is clearly, as you said before we knew exactly what he'd done, an Austrian sex pervert. And then it's like, oh, no, he actually has been convicted of, like, pedophilia. And so he's kind of been ostracized by the town and ends up, like, possibly committing suicide, though really it seems like he was probably murdered by the community. But, like...
Or murdered with the sanction of the police, which is
right,
so many of the murders
definitely.
in this town.
Which is so, in some ways, like, so sad, because, like, he has kind of, this character seems to have grappled with his disgusting nature, and, like, he is so aware of, like, how he has erred, and how he, like, can or cannot interact with children, that, like... when you then find out that everybody else is actually also fucking the kids, you kind of do feel bad for this guy who's like, everybody is, well, because
everybody else is doing the sin and he hates himself despite not doing the sin.
Right. And that presumably the men who killed him are taking out on him the guilt that they are actually feeling.
Oh, I did not consider that.
I don't know. So, like, there's a way to feel pity for him without feeling pity for the horrible acts that he has committed in his past.
Okay, I will accept that. I think one of the really great things about this town is how you get these like really well sketched supporting characters outside of the women's camp, like in the small town, that make it feel recognizably like a small town. There was sort of like that group of like women who working for Matt Mitchum who just like feel very, like leather skinned in the sense of like not visually, but just like they are going to like have these like very tough hides, and they are going to like keep everyone's secrets, even though like keeping those secrets is like secretly killing them. We have the sort of like pedophile outcast that you were talking about. One example I really loved was the guy who sort of seemed like he had, his name is Putty, and he was basically like not like in our reality. He was like a schizophrenic or something, but
Yeah.
he is like the one guy.
He had some sort of mental illness.
Yes.
Yeah.
And his mom apparently was a midwife for 30 years. And so he really like wanted to help Tui by giving her like a book on like how to give birth, and like basically like wanted to help out, but also was sort of like incapable of doing so. But he's always like at like bars, where Robin also is constantly, and he just like feels like the type of guy that like everyone's like knows and everyone sort of like tolerates. And I was like, yeah, like even though this community is deeply fucked up, like you can feel why people would feel that sense of community here.
Right. Well, and if this is the only community you got.
Yeah. I think that we would be a little bit remiss if we didn't talk about just like the beautiful landscapes.
Ugh, Jane Campion's best thing.
And because this is a more rural town, you have people just like randomly riding horses in the same town where people have cars. I think that there's like one shot I think where Tui is like on a horse and she has her little chihuahua in her arms and like a rifle on her back. And it's just like this really beautiful image of like strength.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we know that this is a girl who's been like abused and is pregnant and doesn't know why, but there's sort of this like beautiful resilience to her. That I think is probably like my favorite image of this very visually beautiful TV show.
Yeah, I think that like all of the landscapes, all of the scenery is just so captivating, but also she's not scared but also Campion isn't scared to show us how dangerous it is too, as you mentioned like all the way at the beginning of our conversation, because like one of the saddest moments of the entire series, when there are a lot of sad moments in the series, is when Tui and her friend whatever
Jamie.
his name is. Yeah, Tui and her friend Jamie are defending themselves as Mitchum's men like descend on them. And so he takes her coat and runs out as if he is her running away, so that like they chase after him while she's still there alone with the gun and gets left. But like they eventually chase him off of a cliff, and we literally see his body like fall hundreds of feet in the air.
Yeah.
Onto the ground. And it's like, I mean, we don't actually see the impact, thank God it's not Midsummer, but like
that's the first time you've said that about Midsummer.
Oh, I mean, the thing is that I only like the gruesomeness in Midsummer. I don't want it anywhere else. But I love looking at it in Midsummer. But while it is beautiful, it is also terrifying. And like, I don't know, it happened as such an accident too. Like he just like slipped and then started sliding down the rock face, and it scared me. I would not have been an actor on that shoot.
Not going hiking anywhere soon in New Zealand.
Nope.
I think that landscape also, there's a sort of like precariousness to all of it. And as there is like with your existence in this town, like if you know your place in this town, then you're okay. As long as you do what like the people in charge tell you to do. You know, just like the women who work for Matt Mitchum. But if you like take one wrong step, again, like Bob, then like your life could be over very quickly. And I think the landscape like really captures that. We are recording this in December, and I am a California weather wimp, and I have been complaining to Daniel off the podcast a lot about how cold it is. And I think watching, because, it's like in the 40s, watching top of the lake, you can just like also feel how cold it is. And of course they tell you like the entire time, like no one can survive in this, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's shot, I think
it's shot very coldly.
Yeah, it's shot expressively enough that like you can feel how cold that water is. And I just want to do like a very quick shout out to that beautiful opening credit sequence where you get like a sort of like painterly shot of like the lake, and then you just sort of descend from the lake like underground, and it's such a beautiful like encapsulation of the layers and layers and layers of secrets that form this town, and how basically everyone is sort of like trapped within these secrets because no one can bear to talk about them, and it ruins their life anyway.
Yeah. Opening credit sequence is beautiful. I think the whole world is beautiful, and it's a great juxtaposition between like the beauty of their surroundings and the like actual horrific nature of what's going on in the town. And I think that like Jane Campion is so good about putting the landscape in contrast with whatever story she's telling. All right. Well, now it's time for some rankings.
Your favorite?
Can't wait.
And also, this is super comparable because it's a 6-hour movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think my rankings are going to be pretty uncontroversial. Number 1, The Piano. And then Holy Smoke. And then I think this, honestly. Top of the Lake, Bright Star, In the Cut, An Angel at My Table, and then Sweetie. Great. And also, when we discuss Power of the Dog, our rankings are going to be lit.
Oh, yeah. Can't wait. I think that mine's pretty similar, though, of course, I have the correct top choice of Holy Smoke first. Then The Piano, Top of the Lake, Season 1, Bright Star, and then the grab bag of whatever's at the bottom. Sweetie, Angel at My Table, and In the Cut. Interchangeable is the bottom 3.
So, Daniel, how come you never saw Season 2?
I didn't hear great things.
Well, you heard correctly. I am really looking forward to doing our discussion of Season 2, which I remember being quite a shit show.
Great. I can't wait. That means I'm going to love it.
Probably, yeah. But at the very least, I feel like we can probably agree that Nicole Kidman's wig in Season 2 is better than RB's wig in Season 1. The Nicole Kidman Jane Campion partnership is a very interesting one. And
yep. And we will be covering it with Portrait of a Lady. Well, that's about it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to contact us, we're at allaboutfilmpod@gmail.com. And we'll talk to you next time when we're discussing Top of the Lake, China Girl.